For Module 3, our assignment is to prepare a video about an adult educator of our choosing whose thoughts and actions had an international impact. For my assignment, I have chosen to discuss the life and impact of Dr. William Osler, 1849 to 1919, a Canadian-born physician whose practice and teachings in the 19th and 20th centuries changed the face of Western medicine and medical education as we know it today, earning him the moniker the father of modern medicine. As a physician and educator, Dr. Osler was known for his kindness and excellent bedside manner, modeling a humanist approach to his work likely instilled in him at an early age. His parents upheld strong Christian values, practicing missionary work in rural Canada in the 19th century. In fact, Dr. Osler originally enrolled in university with the intent to pursue the study of divinity. He ultimately changed course, moving from divinity school in Toronto to medical school in Montreal. This background, I think, is important to understanding Dr. Osler's internal motivations and the underlying philosophy that A, drove his approach to patients and students, and B, made him so beloved by those groups. At the time Dr. Osler attended medical school in the 1870s, medical education in North America was very much in its infancy, well behind European institutions in cities like London, Edinburgh, Vienna, and Berlin. It wasn't really until the Flexner Report of 1909 and Osler's mid to late career innovative changes at the Johns Hopkins University, which we will get to, that there was any strict or standardized path to becoming a physician. Foundational education in biological and medical sciences were essentially absent in medical school curricula, and the practice of direct patient care prior to medical school graduation was minimal. So for these reasons, many aspiring physicians in the U.S. and Canada during that time traveled abroad to Europe for additional medical training, Dr. Osler included. Upon completing medical school at McGill University and additional postgraduate training in Europe, Dr. Osler returned to McGill as a pathologist and medical student lecturer, remaining there until 1884 when he accepted a faculty appointment at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. During these early career years, Dr. Osler was described by colleagues and students as ambitious, knowledgeable, enthusiastic, and nurturing. He craved a deeper understanding of disease, one example being smallpox. This sounds perhaps trite or cliche today, but at the time, when science and the practice of medicine had not yet been integrated, his was a very progressive approach. This dedication early in his career paved the way for the incredible innovations he would construct later. In 1989, Osler was recruited to the newly constructed Johns Hopkins University as physician-in-chief and chair of medicine. Johns Hopkins was established according to the European model of medicine, with a strong emphasis on integrating science with medical practice. Under his educational leadership, two major innovations were established that remain a major part of Western medical education and training to this day. Number one, Hopkins became the first medical school to adopt the clerkship system, where medical students are brought onto the wards to learn at the bedside, rather than strictly in a lecture hall. As mentioned previously, until this change, there was very little focus on practice and direct patient care for medical students prior to their graduation throughout much of the 19th century. Osler considered this to be his greatest legacy to medical education, and was even quoted as saying, "I desire no other epitaph than the statement that I taught medical students in the wards, as I regard this by far the most useful and important work I have been called upon to do." Number two, Osler established a system of postgraduate medical training termed residency, where new medical school graduates become physicians in training, taking on an apprenticeship-style employment within a teaching hospital for several years, sometimes as long as 7 to 8 years in fact, prior to being eligible for independent practice. This has since changed, but at the time, residents were called so because they actually took up residence in living quarters attached to the hospital, typically working unregulated, grueling hours caring for patients in the hospital. While residents, of course, no longer reside on the hospital campus, and work hour regulations have been employed following well-founded patient safety and resident wellness concerns. This model of apprenticeship-style training between graduation from medical school and independent practice is very much still in place. For anyone interested, I've actually written a short manuscript on this topic titled Medical Education and Residency Training, Then and Now, and I'm happy to share that if interested. These two changes that we've discussed in medical education and medical training remain very much standard practice today across the Western world, including the US, Canada, much of Western Europe, and Australia. It was during the period of his career at Johns Hopkins from 1889 to 1905 that Dr. Osler solidified himself as an international leader in the field of medicine and medical education. At the twilight of his career in 1905, Osler accepted the position of Regius Chair of Medicine at Oxford University in England, remaining there until his death in 1919. He remained a major voice in the international medical community during this time, founding several journals and organizations that greatly influenced the training of young physicians and practice of modern medicine around the world. These included organizations like the Association of Physicians and the Postgraduate Medical Association, and journals like the Quarterly Journal of Medicine. Osler ultimately succumbed to respiratory complications of the Spanish flu in December 1919, but his works and legacy left an indelible mark on modern medicine and continues to inspire physicians and medical educators over 100 years later. As mentioned previously, Dr. Osler was known for humanism in medicine, serving as a role model to many for his warmth, encouragement, and devotion to those around him. Unfortunately, I would be remiss not to make note of a darker side to Dr. Osler's legacy, which included a history of racist commentary aimed at many non-Caucasian or European races and ethnicities. Please see the article captioned here and cited in the bibliography for further details. While scientific progress encompasses much of the story of the 19th and 20th century medical practice, so too does marginalization and abuse of minority groups. And based on the many written quotes of and reported interactions with Dr. Osler, he was an unfortunate accomplice in this culture. Dr. William Osler's works, teachings, and influences changed the landscape of modern medicine worldwide. Even over 100 years later, the system of medical education and training for students and young physicians reflects his vision and innovation. Medical school curricula and postgraduate residency training programs across the U.S., Canada, Europe, and Australia are living proof of this reality. Despite what we now know were harmful and narrow views related to race and diversity, Osler's devotion to his patients, students, and trainees served to model and validate the importance of humanism in medicine and ethical medical practice. We face many issues in the field of medicine today that could not have been anticipated 100 plus years ago when Dr. Osler was practicing. Skyrocketing healthcare costs at the level of the patient all the way up to the federal government, overwhelming electronic medical record charting and productivity-based reimbursement incentives that mean less face-to-face time between the physician and her patient, medical innovations, internet-based and distance learning, and simulation technology that make learning at the bedside for the medical student or resident physician less of a priority, and a current global pandemic that have left many learners, trainees, and professionals in the field emotionally and psychologically exhausted. These are just a few of the complexities we face in medical practice today, all culminating in feelings of confusion, fear, frustration, and despondence for many of us. While there is no simple answer to many of these issues at the larger systemic level, I still feel there is a place for Osler's approach at the individual level, requiring a return to the fundamentals in medicine, emphasizing the patient as a person, not her disease, learning from direct patient care delivered at the bedside, not a textbook, or more accurately today, a podcast, and modeling professionalism and humanism for the learners and trainees under our supervision. While certainly not a cure-all, I truly believe that a return to these fundamental principles of practice can help guide the caring, passionate clinician to a rich and fulfilling practice. Despite his flaws, I think Dr. Osler exemplified these axioms well over his nearly 50 years in practice. That concludes this presentation on Dr. William Osler, the Canadian-born physician and medical educator whose work changed the landscape of modern medical practice and the approach to medical education. His legacy is an important one, with some positive highlights, but also some significant downsides as well that need to be mentioned when discussing him. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Please feel free to reach out to me via email or the comments section of this YouTube submission with any thoughts, feedback, concerns that you have regarding the presentation. Thanks for listening. Take care.